Today is the final day before Auburn football starts spring practice.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Joining me as he does every single Monday, Lindsay, Crosby of AuburnDaily.com and a bunch of other places hanging out with us. And Lindsay, let's just all have a collective sigh. This is the last day before Auburn takes the field again for spring practice.
We made it.
Which is fun. We made it. We made it. The first difficult chunk of the offseason is practically behind us. And we'll talk about what to watch for as far as the early stages of spring, including some things that Hugh Freeze may talk about or be asked at his media availability tomorrow. We'll also talk about some of the position battles. We've touched on these, obviously, over the last few weeks. But to me, Lindsay, there's three guys that I'm paying attention to specifically over these first few weeks of spring practice. And we'll start with Caleb Burton, the wide receiver, formerly of Ohio State, transferred this past offseason. And I think it was a pleasant surprise to a lot of people because just when you looked at everybody who Auburn brought in at wide receiver a year ago, it was a lot of older guys, and then it was Caleb Burton. And he kind of seemed like, okay, this is a future piece for this Auburn receiving room. And now, over the course of this past season, he became one of the more reliable options. And unfortunately, that was a lower bar than we all wanted it to be. But Caleb Burton showed some versatility, not only in his athletic ability, but also the fact that this coaching staff, or last year's offensive coaching staff, felt comfortable putting him at slot and outside wide receiver. So you then bring in all of these true freshman guys, led by Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Bryce Kane, Malcolm Simmons, and only two of those guys will be here for the spring. But how they use Caleb Burton, where they line him up, is going to be one of the more interesting things that I'm looking for over the first few weeks of Auburn spring camp.
Yeah, and what's tough about this is there's no obvious place to put him, right? He played in both the slot and outside. You look at the size, he's that size where he's not the perfect size to play outside. He's listed 5'11", 173, but he absolutely can make it work, and we saw him make it work last year. And so it makes things really difficult, and I think my big question on this is, does he just play one of those spots, or do they move him around and have him play multiple because it gives you more options, more versatility as an offense?
Yeah. And this is one of those situations where, man, you really wish Malcolm Simmons and Perry Thompson were already here, because it seems like Bryce Kane's going to be your slot guy. Seems like Jay Fair is going to be one of your slot guys. Cam Coleman's going to be probably the wide receiver one on the outside. And so just because of the extra traffic at slot, and you're going to have a lot of situations where Rivaldo Fairweather moves from tight end to essentially a big slot receiver. And hey, they may have him outside as well. But it kind of makes me wonder, is at least the spring version of the battle for the other outside wide receiver that's not Cam Coleman, opposite of Cam Coleman, is it transfer Robert Lewis versus Caleb Burton for that other outside spot if they choose to use him in that capacity?
They're very similar size. Robert Lewis obviously has played. I feel like he has a lot more experience coming to Georgia State. And I don't know who I prefer there. And I think really it's going to come down to a comfort kind of thing, right? Who looks like they're going to thrive the most from that spot. But then again, the flip side of this is I hate to have them battle for that spot and then potentially in the fall put them somewhere else because you brought somebody else onto campus after spring. And so I don't know. I part of me thinks just have them battle it where you plan to have them play in the fall. If you plan to use one of them in the slot, have them battle there now or use them outside. We just don't really know. But either way, interesting to see it. I could see an argument for having them both on the field. And I think that's not the right way to handle spring, because the assumption from here is that you're not going to have them both on the field at the same time in the fall, given the other options that you have. So it's kind of weird here, I think.
Well, the fact that there's actual options at multiple receiver positions for the first time at Auburn in a hot minute, that's exciting. So, yeah, Caleb Burton's one of the first guys that I'm really going to spend extra time watching and asking about over the first few weeks. The next is Keldrick Falk. We've talked about pass rush a lot over this offseason. Pass rush next year is my biggest concern currently for this team. If you tell me Keldrick Falk takes the natural steps that most 5-stars do from their first year to their second year, that worry shrinks a little bit. You do need other guys to step up, but you feel better about the tandem of Jalen McLeod and Keldrick Falk on those outside spots. If Keldrick Falk takes that next step, which we all think he's going to. I think he's going to. I think it's going to be fine, but you got to see it. And so to me, Keldrick Falk will definitely get a lot of my attention this spring as well.
Keeping that short-term kind of focus, I feel like what we've seen is you need a really, really potent 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
And then you need some sort of quality depth as your number 3 guy who can elevate to a number 2 or someone to get hurt. We've seen that multiple times. Falk, he listed at 6'6", 281. He's moved. He played a lot of defensive end, it feels like. And I like him as one of those 4 outside guys. I wonder how much they contemplate in a different looking offense, how much they contemplate moving him around a little bit and letting him play on both sides of the field and not just pigeonhole him into one spot. Because I think that does impact what you need behind him from a depth perspective. Until we know without a doubt who that third guy is, getting Keldrick Falk reps at multiple spots in the spring looks like the smartest way to do that, so you can use his flexibility to fill in depth versus somebody else's flexibility when trying to figure out who to back up.
And some of that may depend on which of these transfers and which of these true freshmen do take that step forward. Like if TJ Lindsay becomes a dude, and it's like, well, we can give him more reps at defensive end, or Malik Blockton takes a step forward, and it's like, well, we like him more at the 3 technique, so that allows us to keep Keldrick out more. Then Amaris Williams is another guy. He could potentially be Keldrick's true backup at defensive end. So once again, good problem to have with a lot of guys that you can kind of see, okay, here is their path to playing time. It's just young. It's a young group on the defensive front, and you need certain guys to step up.
You do. I feel good about TJ Lindsay mostly because of the name, but I am bothered that he spells it wrong. It's Lindsay.
He spells it with an E,
which is, who would do that? You spell Lindsay with an A, you spell Zach without a K or an H. We all know this. I don't know why you'd do something different.
I'm with you. And it blows me away, the people that comment on YouTube, which please continue to do so. But it's like they add the H, and it's like, my name is right there. It's right there. But that's okay.
Who is Zach? Who is Zach?
Who is this Zach that you speak of? That's right. That's right. The
it's
third
like
guy.
Who's Lindsay?
Yeah, Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Because it's a partay. All right.
Hey.
Then the last guy I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on is Keontae Scott. I mean, we have talked about this over and over and over again. Is he going to play outside at corner? Is he going to play nickel? Is he going to play safety? Once again, you feel really good about this defensive back room with Jaron Thompson coming in, with them having Kay and Lee come back, and we're all expecting him to be the number 1 corner, or maybe the number 2, I guess, depending on your thoughts on Keontae Scott at outside corner. But there's a lot to like about the defensive back room, and I think Keontae Scott and his versatility allow you to kind of exercise the true talent and potential of that room. But I'm excited to see where we see him line up when we get our viewing window tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'm kind of deferring to you on this because you are the defensive back whisperer. You have a great track record of that.
Sure. Yeah.
But when I was trying to look at the roster just now to figure out where he might play, Keontae Scott going to be slaughtered, or quarterback or nickel, I did see that all of your defensive backs are listed as either cornerbacks or safeties, with the exception of your 2 Power 5 transfers. Jaron Thompson is in there as a defensive back coming from Texas. Antonio Kite is listed as a defensive back coming from Alabama. And so part of me wonders, I just happened to notice that while you were talking. And so I'm like, is that because they're planning on exploring where is best to play those guys? Or is that just like a weird technical thing where they transferred in, maybe they were officially listed in the portal as a defensive back, and we just haven't codified where they're going to be, but everybody else is specifically a cornerback or specifically a safety. I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting because those are 2 of the guys in the room that I do kind of think are slotted to a certain spot. Like I think Jaron Thompson's a safety, and I think Antonio Kite is an outside corner. So it's got to be a transfer thing. That has to be like how they do transfers. So interesting observation on your part.
Yeah, like maybe in the portal when they're listed, it's just listed as defensive back. And so we just imported their info straight from there. Just find that kind of odd, right?
Yeah, I do think it's especially when the roster was updated over the weekend. So interesting stuff there. All right. What are we watching for specifically over this first week of spring practice from a holistic, big picture point of view? It all starts with Hugh Freeze. We discussed in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Lindsay, can you imagine placing a wager anywhere other than FanDuel Sportsbook?
Would never do it. Would never imagine. The best MLB lines? FanDuel.
Yeah, the best MLB, the best college basketball, the best futures right now for the NFL and for college.
I will say, not college baseball. Don't. That's kind of a sore subject in the state of Alabama. Don't bet college baseball. But everything else is on FanDuel.
Nice. Yeah. And look, Lindsay, you're a Braves guy. You are the Braves guy at BravesToday.com. But and a lot of folks that are Auburn fans watching are Braves people. You can bet on pretty much any Brave to win their specific positional award. They're the favorite. Spencer Strider's the favorite for the NL Cy Young, Ronald Acuna, obviously. So, yeah, be sure to head over to FanDuel right now. FanDuel.com/lockedon. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So be sure to check that out. FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Lindsay, what should we be watching for early in spring practice? To me, Hugh Freeze is going to meet with the media before our scheduled media viewing window on Tuesday. And I guess there's 3 topics that he's probably going to have to discuss. I'd be shocked if he wasn't asked these things. Okay. The first is there actually a quarterback battle? What do you expect to see from your quarterbacks? And is there a quarterback battle? Because the last time we really talked about this was after the game, the bowl loss to Maryland. And you said it was an open competition. Is that still the case?
Yeah. Baby Goat had his welcome to college football. Did it in style. Had a great game. And so, yeah, like I could legitimately see different scenarios where there's different quarterbacks this year because you're bringing in a Walker White. You've got Baby Goat coming back with all the momentum in the world. You've got Peyton Thorne, who struggled last year, has a better situation to be in this year. Really curious what Hugh Freeze is going to say about that. I'm going to be watching for your article about it. I'm not going to be watching Hugh Freeze on it. I'll be watching for your article on it at auburndaily.com simply because I can't really hear words yet.
Yes. Yeah. auburndaily.com. No question about it. All right. The second thing is everybody healthy? Is everybody available? Or is anybody going to miss spring because of something that happened in the offseason that wasn't reported? Or are folks still kind of nursing some injuries from the previous season that maybe we weren't as aware of, maybe them being as serious? But what's the current state of the roster look like as far as availability? I think that'll be something he addresses as well.
Yeah. One of the big conversations with the transfer portal is getting these guys in time to go through spring practice. So if you get in, but you're hurt and can't go through spring,
sure.
I'm not going to say it's not worth bringing you in. Obviously, we're happy you're here, but it's one of those things where it's not as productive as being able to go through spring. And some people have questioned, were some of the struggles you saw with the offense last year because you were relying on guys who didn't go through spring. So very, very, very curious to see who is healthy enough to play and who is not.
Yeah. And then the last one is positionally. Are there position changes throughout this roster that we need to look at? I don't think they'd really necessarily talk about that from a defensive back point of view, like the discussion we were just having. But does a traditional, off-ball linebacker potentially get reps at jack linebacker because there's not a whole lot of jack linebackers on this roster right now? Does a guy like Wesley Steiner say all of that? Does he come in and say, hey, I want to try that? We talked about that with Cam Riley, last offseason. That never happened. So those are the 3 things I'm expecting storyline-wise out of Hugh Freeze tomorrow. And then the other 2 things that I'm looking at as far as watching through this first week of spring are the quarterback reps even. Like, he can say whatever he wants, but like if Peyton Thorne's getting 80% of the reps, which I don't think will happen, I think that's high. But if he did, obviously we know his thoughts on the quarterback battle there. Or is it 30% Peyton, 20% Hank, 20% Holden, 20% Walker White, and then walk-ons after that? I'm not positive the math added up on that. It does. That 10% to walk-ons. That would make sense. So that to me, is the big thing that we're looking at. And we won't get all of that through the media window. We're going to have to get that through reports and folks that we're talking to within the program. But to me, that's something I think we'll learn pretty quickly on, like, is this a legitimate battle or not? You look at the reps. And
not only the reps as far as the percentage, but the order. If you have something like, let's say, this is random. Let's say Holden Geriner's the fourth in line to get those reps. Is that a deliberate decision on where they think they are in the pecking order? Is that a message to Holden? How does that work? So something else to watch for is not only the percentage, but the order they take them in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing this isn't what you were asking, but I'm just adding on to that. Like, I would guess the order would be Peyton Thorne, Holden Geriner, Hank Brown, and Walker White for this first week. Does that change by the end of spring? And if it does, that's a huge story. It's a huge story.
That feels like that makes sense for what that order could conceivably be to open practice based on experience and what they did last year.
Yeah, and then circling back to the defensive back and the wide receiver situations, the groupings used at defensive line, defensive back, and wide receiver, right? Like, when Keldrick's at defensive end, is Jason Jones always at nose? And then who's at the 3 technique? Is that going to be a Trill Carter situation, the transfer from Texas? Or do they potentially move those guys around if Keldrick scoots in? Who's the first in at defensive end next to Keldrick? Because then that's something they're looking at for a potential starting situation or substitution. So that to me is worth looking at. Same with defensive backs in regards to where Keontae Scott is. If they do move him around, who are the guys playing next to him? I think that's very important. And then wide receiver, I think that's self-explanatory.
On that same note, and you'll know better than I will because you've been to more media windows than I have, is it worth paying attention to which defensive backs line up against which wide receivers? Is that something that they typically try to keep ones and ones together, walk-ons versus walk-ons, or is that more kind of random?
I think it depends. I think we saw more ones versus ones last year with Freeze. I don't think we saw that as much with Harsin and Gus. I'm trying to remember. You've kind of put me on the spot here. But last year, I remember there being a lot of ones versus ones.
That's what I thought I remembered under Freeze. And so to me, again, probably not as telling as who is grouped where, but I think also maybe seeing who matches up against who kind of gives you idea. Like if they have Colton Hood out there against Cam Coleman, maybe they feel really good about Colton Hood in 2024. So maybe something to watch for if that 1 versus 1 holds true.
Yeah, good point. Good point there. So those are the things to watch for early in spring. And there are some position battles that I think are important as far as building this roster and potentially phasing guys out if that's what they choose to do in this new era of the transfer portal and what college football has become. And we'll discuss what that looks like next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Want to encourage you to join the Locked On Auburn Discord. It is free. All you have to do is click the link in the episode description down below. For folks saying, okay, it's third segment on Monday. What is going on? Where is my baseball chatter? We're recording this in the first few innings of Auburn taking on Virginia. It's just the way the schedules worked. So sorry. We'll try to sprinkle in some baseball later in the week if there's time. Position battles. One that is very interesting to me is the number 2 linebacker spot. We all assume Eugene Asante is going to be linebacker 1. I am really intrigued with the battle between Dorian Mausi, the transfer from Duke, and Austin Keys, and then maybe a potential push from Robert Woodyard. But Dorian Mausi and Austin Keys battling it out for linebacker 2 and linebacker 3 really gets me excited. I can't tell you why, but once again, I think it's another situation where it's like, man, Auburn has done such a good job at improving their roster from a year ago. Because last year, the conversation was Eugene Asante, Larry Nixon, and Cam Riley. And these top 3 are way better than where we were a year ago.
I'm going to paraphrase our favorite Tuesday guest and talk about their hulking super teens, right?
That's right.
Like you've got Austin Keys listed at 6'2", 232. I feel like he's up a little bit from last year. Dorian Mausi, 6'1", 234. But both these guys are guys that this coaching staff has gone out to get to add to this room. And so obviously they're high on these guys. I think you're right to have them 2 and 3. I do think it would be a good thing for Auburn to see good run here from Robert Woodyard, a very well-regarded recruit that so far hasn't really had the impact that we were hoping he would. Obviously, absolutely still can, but I think if he could push this into a 3-way battle for the 2, 3, and 4 spots, it gives Auburn a lot of options. Again, if there's an injury and you have to slot a new player into that group, you're your top 4 could be very, very good, and some of the more talented top 4s you've had in a while at Auburn if these guys all work out. A lot of ifs there, but I like the idea.
And then you look at the guys coming in, your DeMarcus Riddick, your DJ Barber, your Joe Phillips, who, as far as natural ability, these guys may be better. They just haven't played college football yet.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think it'd be crazy to see one of these guys overachieve and be a top 2 or 3 linebacker on this roster. And then if that happens and you're a Robert Woodyard and you're looking around, it's like, well, dang, these guys are really good. Like they all could hop me in the depth chart, and they're younger than me. So what do you do in that situation? In this modern era of college football, you transfer. So I am curious to see how some of these guys will handle that.
Right.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about these talented young guys that are here. And if they feel them kind of nipping at their heels at the end of spring, they may say, this is a business decision. I need to get on the field. I'm going to hop. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Linebacker, there's a lot of dudes. There's a lot of dudes in that room.
Dude, we didn't even mention Wes Steiner, senior, 6 foot, 245. It feels like
I'm shocked he's still here. He's still here.
It feels like he's the most qualified one who could try to kick down into, giving back up at Jack or something like that. Simply because, 1, it looks like there's a million dudes in front of him. And 2, that's a position of need. And it feels like maybe his frame and some of what he does better might be suited for that role versus some sort of off ball, dropping into coverage from time to time kind of role.
He's so athletic.
He's
so athletic. He moves so well, and he has all the traits you want. It just hasn't worked out. And so we'll see what happens with him.
I feel like I'm much better at scouting baseball players and football players, but with Wes Steiner, it feels like the initial decision of go forward or backwards is what gets him almost every time. He ends up being out of position the entire time. Yeah. Put him into a role where the ball is snapped, he takes off, see ball, get ball. Just have him do that. It feels like that's the best way to use him in his final year of eligibility. But what do I know? I'm a baseball guy.
I mean, I would rather him be the 4th Jack on this team than the 6th or 7th linebacker. Yeah. We'll see. Right guard is going to be another one. I think Jeremiah Wright enters as the favorite to be Auburn's kind of 5th starting offensive lineman.
Okay.
But can we see a battle between Jaden Muskrat? We saw Tate Johnson a little bit at guard a year ago, even though I think he's going to be the true backup center, but they may try him at guard as well, just because it seems like Freeze likes him. Can a Dylan Cinda possibly compete there? Can a DeAndre Carter's a true freshman compete at right guard? We're also all assuming that Dylan Wade will play left guard because he's scooting in from left tackle to left guard. We're assuming he stays on the left side, or they move those guys around. We'll see. But that's a position grouping with offensive linemen that we saw a group at the start of spring, and it was that same group at the end of spring. And I'm kind of expecting a similar thing to happen this year.
Yeah, I would love to see one of these guys we haven't really named to jump into this and make this a viable, not competition per se, but make this more than just a 5 or 6 deep group, but give you 2 or 3 options on that second team you feel really good about were you to need them. Because same thing, there's always injuries. They always come up. This is the most physical sport there is. Right. And being able to say, yeah, we were surprised in spring, but EJ Harris had a really great spring and we feel like he could be a guard for us. Or, Jaden Musk, or whatever, whoever it is, giving Auburn more options would be great, especially because you look at some of these guys and they are, Xavier Miller's a senior, Wright is, I think he's a junior, maybe academically he's a senior.
Jeremiah Wright's a super senior, actually.
Oh, there you go. Okay, they need to update that on the thing then.
Yeah.
Other interesting notes: one of these guys is listed as an offensive lineman. Everybody else is an offensive line. So I thought that was interesting.
Who is it?
Percy Lewis.
That's the other lone transfer. So they must just label transfers differently.
It's got to be something coming off of how the portal has you listed, because everybody's offensive line. Him, offensive lineman. I'm glad they clarified he was a man.
Interesting.
We needed that.
Interesting.
Thank you guys.
Percy Lewis, very large man. Then the last position battle that I'm kind of focusing on, especially early in spring practice, is the entire defensive line.
All of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you feel good about Jason Jones starting at nose. Mm-hmm. You feel good about Keldrick starting at defensive end. We think they may start at 3 technique depending on how things go, but that's it in the 2 deep. Yeah. Like if you told me that some of these freshmen came in and they beat out Trill Carter or Gage Keys to transfer defensive linemen, that came in this offseason, I'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not shocked, planning for the future. And so, yeah, I think you can really make, there's not a defensive lineman on this roster that's on scholarship that I don't think you can make an argument for. I think you can make the case for all of these guys getting serious playing time. Every single one of them, which is good. That's, once again, good situation to be in. Yeah, it's just there's going to be some tough battles and tough decisions here.
It feels like that's good because it's depth, but it's also now you have less information on that key play in the fourth quarter, and you need to say, who are my 4 guys I can put in that we know we're going to go get this quarterback?
Yeah.
So like you get less information, and so rotating. I'm a big fan of rotating heavily on the defensive line.
Me too.
A big issue that I had with the previous guy was they just like to run the same 4 guys on stadiums on Thursday and then make them turn around and play the entire game on Saturday.
No days off, Lindsay. No days off.
Yeah. Well, never mind. He took recruiting days off. Anyway, but it's an issue when you don't know who you can go to outside of Keldrick Falk and Jason Jones. And so I do want to see, as much as I love the depth, I want to see a guy or two step up and spring and say, hey, I'm that number 3 guy on this line. I'm going to be a starter because of just how good I was. And I'm going to make it where you can't even make an argument for somebody else over me. I want that guy to step up just for peace of mind, nothing else.
Yeah, no question about it. Lindsay Crosby, thank you for your time as always. How can people check out everything you've got going on?
I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. It's the hub for everything. It could be college baseball, auburndaily.com. It could be minor league baseball, Locked On MLB Prospects. It could be Major League Baseball, bravestoday.com.
Yep, and you can find all my written work at auburndaily.com or bravestoday.com and somewhere else. Both of us coming soon. Be very cool. Very cool to see. Please like this video. Please subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow. This has been Locked On Auburn.